In this video, we're going to be describing some basic geometric figures and some symbols, some ways that we can write and describe these things using our geometric symbols. So we're going to talk about those basic terms. The first one is a plane. This is how you can imagine things existing in a two-dimensional surface. Anything that's on that surface, on your piece of paper, on your desk, that would be a plane. Planes could be imaginary, they could be hovering in space. If things are on that plane, they can be described by using either a lowercase italicized letter, if that's given to you, or you can actually describe a plane by using any 3 points on that plane. That's enough to describe the plane. For the most part, we rarely have to name planes. Just recognize them if they're given to us. Plane M would be this surface going diagonally. Plane N is this one going horizontally. We could have intersections of planes that intersect at a line. We could have things intersecting through planes. But we're really not ever going to see anything that technical. So just know that planes are surfaces that things exist on. And those things are points. That would be one thing that could be on a plane. A point is just an exact location in space. It describes that exact location and nothing else. We can use points to end lines or talk about portions of lines in between 2 points. So we can find the length between 2 points. We can find the midpoint between 2 points. We'll be doing a lot of that stuff. To name points, we use a capital letter like you see here. And point B would be talking about that location right there. Other things that can be on planes are segments. They are portions of a line or pieces of a line. They have a beginning point and an end point, and so your segment describes every location in between those 2 points. We describe or name segments by using this horizontal line above the 2 endpoint letters. And when we name segments, it actually doesn't matter what order we name them in. As long as we use points A and B to describe it, we could say segment AB, or we could say segment BA, but putting that horizontal line on top is describing everything in between those 2 points. Rays are another thing that can exist in a plane. Rays have one endpoint. It's kind of a starting point, but we call it an endpoint. And then they continue forever in a direction away from it. And so the way that we name a ray is we always start with that endpoint letter. It is incorrect to name it the other way. So in the same way that we can name a segment both ways, frontwards or backwards, rays do not allow us to do that. We always have to start with the endpoint letter and then name the next point anywhere off in the other direction. So we're given the endpoint A, we're going to start with that in our name, and then we can use any point after that. So in this case, we're going to use B to end it. And actually, the easiest way to think about or remember is that you always line up your symbol parts with the points that correspond. So if A is your endpoint, it needs to go beneath the endpoint on your symbol, and B is somewhere else in the other direction, so B goes below the arrow. Again, totally incorrect to say this. This would describe a totally different ray. So rays are really the only symbol that we're really specific and strict about. Lines are where we have no endpoints. So even though we have points on the line, it doesn't stop there. It continues past those points and describes everything going in both directions endlessly. And when we name a line, this time we're going to use a symbol with 2 arrows. And as long as we use any 2 points on the line in any order, then we can name that line. So if we had points A and B here, we could say line AB, or we could say line BA. Either way describes this line. There is also another way that we can name lines using an italicized letter that might be floating off to the side here, but we don't see that very often. A few more terms here. We can describe 2 or more points that lie on the same line. And the way that we describe that is we call them collinear. Co meaning together, and linear meaning line. So essentially this word means together on the same line. Any 2 points can be collinear, so even though A and H are not drawn having a line or connected there, we could say that A and H are collinear because we could imagine that a line could connect them both. And that's kind of the tricky thing about collinear. But really, if you're asked just a generic, easy question, which points are collinear in a picture, then just look at the points that are all on the same line and name those. So A, F, and B are all collinear. They don't have to necessarily be in a line. It could be a segment or it could be a ray. As long as they're all on the same geometric thing, then we describe them as collinear. Non-collinear would be the opposite, meaning that they're not all on the same thing. So if you have a group of points, for example, A, F, and G, well, they're not all on the same line, and there's no way that we could draw a line to connect them. So those would be non-collinear points. And a couple more terms here, very similar ideas. We now have coplanar and non-coplanar. Again, co meaning together, planar meaning plane, so this must be describing things that are together on the same plane. So we could have any geometric figures, lines, rays, points, segments. If they're on the same plane, they're coplanar. The only tricky thing about coplanar is that we can imagine some other situations. Any 3 points are actually coplanar regardless of whether they're drawn to be on the same plane. It's because we can imagine putting them on the same plane. So any 3 points could always be on a plane whether or not you see it drawn or not. And the other tricky thing about coplanar is that a line and a point are always coplanar. So line GH and point A are coplanar even though they're not drawn to be so in this diagram. But for the most part in our class, we won't see anything that tricky. You'll just be looking at the picture and describing things that are on the same plane or not. And if they're not on the same plane, then we say they're non-coplanar. And so, for example, points A and E, they could be coplanar, but line GH, there's no way we could draw a plane that contains all of that. So there's some basic geometric terms. We're going to be using those pretty much throughout the entire year. Make sure that you study those terms. You can use those terms when you're talking in class, and that you can use those symbols. You got to be able to read that symbol and interpret it, or describe a picture by using that symbol.